I think engagement rates are interesting to understand how someone's audience interacts with them, but it should just be used directionally. It is not the end all be all. And I think as influencer marketers, we leaned on that stat mostly because we didn't have the resources, the insight, etc., to understand past that, right? And I think
Yep.
that that's the reason that Tinuiti works with gen.video on a lot of our projects, is because we want to understand what's after the like, the share, the comment. What are we doing next? And that's kind of what we were talking about early on, because yes, engagement rates directionally can tell me, okay, I know micro influencers should have a 3% engagement rate. If it's below that, then maybe they have some bots or followers, sure, whatever. But what I also care about is if I spend $500 on a micro influencer piece of content, but they sell, $1,000 worth of product, then their engagement rate can be 0.0001%. I could care less about that, right? Because my end goal is at that point in time to move product.
Welcome back to Generation Influence, a podcast featuring the movers and shakers working behind the scenes in influencer marketing and e-commerce. I'm your host, Bill Hildebol, one of the founders of gen.video, a platform in the influencer marketing space with a real focus on e-commerce outcomes and differentiated analytics. I'm really excited to have today's guest, who is Crystal Duncan, the SVP of Partnership Marketing at Tinuiti. Crystal, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks for having me. This is great.
I'm super excited. There's so much overlap between what we do professionally that this show is either going to be a wildly compelling inside baseball of influencer marketing, or like the worst insider joke that no one will understand with the two of us. Not sure which way it's going to go, but pretty confident we'll have fun either way. So I'm ahead of myself. Tell the audience who the heck you are, what you do, and where you do it.
So again, like Bill said, my name is Crystal Duncan. I am the SVP of Partnership Marketing at Tinuiti, and that is a fancy way of saying I oversee our influencer marketing team and our affiliate marketing team. My background is primarily an agency gal, also primarily in the influencer space. I kind of lucked out right after college of joining one of the early on influencer startup agencies. Bill, I know you're familiar with them, but a company called IZEA. I was a very early on employee there. Spent about 10 years there, then made the transition over into the bigger agency world, and I spent 4 years at Edelman. And then after Edelman, I've now been almost exactly 2 years now at Tinuiti, which is more of a performance marketing side of the industry in the world.
I want to note for the record that you actually define influencer and affiliate as two different spaces. And this week's podcast, which went out, so it will be a few weeks in the past as people are watching this, but we spent some time with Austin Ratner, who runs affiliate and affiliate specifically at Nike, and spent some time talking about how affiliate is different than influencer. So maybe we'll come back to that, maybe not, but I always like to see how people define the world, and you broke those two spaces down as two different things. Tell us more about Tinuiti. It's not a household name necessarily in influencer marketing, but it certainly is in other spaces. And you guys are fearsome competitors in some disciplines. So tell us what Tinuiti does, why it has so much momentum right now, and and again, some of the strengths other than great people like yourselves.
That's great. Yeah. So Tinuiti is actually the largest independent performance marketing agency in the US. So that's a little bit of a differentiator there, just being on the independent side alone. And I think the other thing that's different about what we do at Tinuiti is we take a unique approach that kind of melds branding and performance marketing to help our clients, what we always say, brand as they sell and sell as they brand. So we think about it with both of those hats. And we do have divisions kind of across the spectrum that you'd expect from a performance marketing agency, from search to social to Amazon marketplaces, streaming and linear TV. And then the influencer practice is relatively new at Tinuiti. Like I mentioned, I've been there about 2 years, and that is, how long the practice has been around. So we kind of really offer a one-stop shop for our clients when they're looking for an agency partner to help them with kind of all of those different facets of, we'll call it digital or performance marketing.
Given that description of Tinuiti overall, I'm going to guess that your take on influencer marketing has something to do with connecting influencer marketing and e-commerce. Yes, no, can you expand on that?
Yeah, there's definitely a strong tie there, right? I think that for a really long time, and I think you and I have even talked about this behind closed doors, but like for a really long time, influencers always been held by, let's say, folks that focus on maybe upper funnel or the PR side of the world. And I think as influencers getting older and older and more mature, and we're seeing more people get involved in it, we can see that they can be deployed in a bunch of different, ways, shapes, forms, pieces of the funnel, what have you. So we do look at influencer not only as upper funnel, but mid funnel, lower funnel. We look at them as content creators. We look at it as, e-commerce drivers. Really depends on what the strategy is that we're looking to do for our clients. And then the way that we deploy that will change. And I think that that's where we can get really smart and sophisticated depending on what it is that we're trying to do for our clients, for our projects, really what the ultimate goals are. Influencers can kind of be that Swiss Army knife to help us across a bunch of different facets at this point.
I love that. Focus on repurposing the content and using it, thinking about it in all the contexts it could be leveraged. And in fact, what I say is that sounds a little bit like gen.video's positioning. And so, hey, Blake, why are we booking our competitors on this show? What's going on? Who's next? Ted Murphy? And actually, Ted would say some really crazy stuff. So actually, let's look at that. Let's get Ted on the show. Crystal knows Ted too.
I do.
All right.
Very well.
Tell the audience more about the benefits of marrying influencer with e-commerce.
Yeah, I think at least the stance we take at Tinuiti is, influencers can be measurable from a business impact perspective, right? It's not us saying we're working with an influencer that has 100,000 followers and that's the KPI we're looking at. Sure, awareness is always going to be something that's beneficial. You can't have lower funnel and conversion without having upper funnel and awareness. We all know that as marketers. Yep. But I think where we look at it a little bit differently is tying back influencer to performance and understanding what is the ultimate goal and what are we doing for our clients. I think, and you guys are probably getting this too, Bill, is like we get more pressure from, CMOs or VPs of marketing saying, I can't, check all the boxes with just awareness numbers. I have to know how much product we've moved. I have to understand what my ROAS is towards, the investment in this property. So that's what we're trying to look at. I think in addition to that, we're also looking at how else can influencer integrate into the bigger digital picture. I know that when I started this many moons ago, a lot of times brands would come to us and say, we've peeled off 100 grand. We want to test influencer. We want to see what it's like. And it would almost be this separate swim lane that really didn't have any tie back to everything else that was going on in the digital ecosystem. And for an end consumer, that can be confusing, right? Why is this influencer talking about attribute A, but the rest of the marketing is talking about attribute B? They should be together. So the other thing we're looking at now is how can we leverage our influencers into our larger, picture of everything we're doing. Sure, whitelisting, that's table stakes. That's something everyone's doing on social these days. But is there a step further? And this is where I think gen.video does a really good job. Is there a step further into things from like a commerce perspective? Are we running influencer assets through, say, retail media? Are we able to leverage the content on PDP pages? Does that at that point in time also change what the trajectory looks like? If we put more influencer content on PDP pages so people can see what a jacket looks like when it's actually on a real person versus a flat lay, did we then see a change in sales? Did we see sales go up? Is that impactful because of the content that's more user generated and they understand what it looks like? These are all just things that we can measure along the way. And I think that there's the direct attribution, and then there's like a long-term, more halo attribution that we can look at to understand how influencers, creators, however we want to bucket the term, can impact into what we're doing in an integrated model versus just saying influencer posted on TikTok, we got this many sales. Okay, cool. That's step one. What's step 2, 3, 4, and continuing to give these things legs and make the investment more worthwhile for us.
It's so exciting, right? I mean, you when you think about being integrated through all those flows and that people are seeing that opportunity and seeing that magic, it's definitely something, I've talked about for a long time. Obviously something you've probably talked about in different formats throughout your career, and really kind of maybe coming together a little bit in Tinuiti even more than you're able to do at IZEA and then, Edelman. But what I have seen as budgets have grown, we've sort of moved from, there were kind of influencer marketing platforms or companies. You had the PR guys were kind of involved. Maybe the competition between those two disciplines has increased over time. And then now what you're seeing is the budgets have gotten bigger. And I've been thinking about it through the lens of the budgets has attracted the attention, I'm going to say, of media firms. And again, we can, whether Tinuiti wants to be fully in that bucket now that, there's performance, but there's also retail media, which is this sort of weird hybrid of the two. But we're also seeing the national media firms get much more interested in influencers, saying that, no, that's not just the province of, the PR firm. That's we want to be involved in that. And I've thought about it from a budgetary perspective. You built that answer up in a much more dynamic, in a much more exciting way, which is talking about it. No. It's because there's something about influencer that lets us tie these different disciplines together to see this performance, to use the content in all these different ways, and to therefore ultimately answer the CMO's question, which is, how can I bring awareness and performance together? And I mean, I don't know that if there's anything you particularly want to riff off of there, but again, I've been seeing it through that dog eat dog, static pie. Everybody's got it, fighting over the same dollars. And maybe the pie is growing in a sense, but then there's this also sense of like, who's what is it? Whose ox is getting gored? And so I don't know. I just love the way you put it, where it was a real focus on how it can be interdisciplinary, and that's what's attracting it versus, oh, it's just bigger dollars, so we all need to fight over it.
And I agree with you. I think if we had the same conversation 5, 6, 7 years ago, I think it would be different, right? I think it would be the same pot, all of us kind of fighting against it. But it almost feels like now the space has evolved where it's everyone can coexist and play nice in the sandbox type of, kind of experience, because not, again, like I said before, not all influence is created equal. There's different ways to deploy influencers for different kind of needs. And we have full-fledged strategies and ecosystems laid out for our clients based on what we're trying to do, right? So if we are going for a large moment in time, or we do need some awareness for a new product launch, no reason you can't go back on our laurels of our our awareness, influencer kind of 101 that we've done for years and years. And maybe that's more of like the PR moments in time, right? We get some real cool name. There's some earned media that goes along with it. We've got that. There is a middle funnel, I think, aspect to this as well, where we talk about use cases. And great, you now know about the product. Well, here's ways you can use it. And did you know that you can use it in all these different facets? I will tell you a brand that I think does that really well, as like silly as this is baking soda, the Arm & Hammers of the world, right? You think baking soda and you think I put a box in my fridge and that's supposed to keep my fridge nice and not smell bad over time. But that's not what they want. They don't want you to buy one box of baking soda every year and that's all you do with it. But now we see these cleaning hacks on TikTok where it's like combine baking soda, lemon juice, and a Tide Pod, and you can clean everything in your house, right? And all of these different use cases are very interesting and promote you to want to do more with baking soda and then buy more with baking soda. So that's like kind of a use case thing. You know the product, now you're going to use it in all these different ways. And who are the best people to show you how to use stuff? Influencers. They're the ones that will come out with cool hacks. They're the ones that people are like, oh my gosh, I didn't know I need 10 boxes of baking soda in 6 months instead of one. And then you can think of lower funnel when you're talking about what are the conversion drivers. Great. So now I know that I can use baking soda. Maybe this is where we talk about the retail tie-in that you mentioned before. Did you know you can buy baking soda at Target? And here's the closest Target to you, or here's how you can buy it online, or here's a bundle where you can buy 6 for the price of 3, whatever it is, right? Like you've got your lower funnel tactics there. In my opinion, your lower funnel tactics are where a lot of times you can also play around with your paid media buys, right? Like how are we, amplifying those through, whether it's paid social, whether it's retail media, it doesn't really matter, but that's where that type of content is the type of content where you can say, oh yeah, I did want to buy this. Okay, I saw I can clean my couch with a pot, like a top of a pot and a washcloth and baking soda. So let me go buy it now because I got served this, influencer piece of content through paid social. So I think that there's a lot of different ways to do that. And depending on your product, depending on your brand, depending on your budget, there are ways to think about this full funnel. And it's not like you mentioned at the very top of this question, it's not like the budget's 50 grand for a quarter anymore. That type of strategy is going to cost far more and it's going to span a longer amount of time. So therefore we have to think about this not in a campaign centric way, but in a maybe not even always on way, but in a holistic time frame where we're deploying this at the right time in order to hit the customers as they're thinking through this. Because you and I both know the customer journey is a little bit more confusing now than it was 5, 6, 7 years ago.
Absolutely not linear, all over the place. And I think what you did, I mean, it was such a great wrap up to, yes, you own this quote, not all influencer marketing is created equal. And I think you just highlighted throughout the answer, but like at the very end, right? The point is what you were talking about is moving from tactical to strategic, right? I'm not going to run a campaign with 5 people. Hopefully, they got 1 million followers and reach and I get lots of impressions. It's like, no. We're going to like weave this through and we are following the consumer where they are. And the other thing that's just resonates so true for me is, yes, there is nobody that's going to do a better job creating enthusiasm and understanding about all the different use cases of a product and what is going to resonate and matter to other consumers, right? Because that is their bread and butter. If they're not bringing those interesting insights to their audience, they're not going to be long-lived as an influencer. And that's the part where it's so critical for brands to trust and to listen and to create this interactivity. It's not walking away and throwing it completely to the influencer.
Sure.
It's a two-way street, a dialogue about, here's what we think. What do you think? Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Yes, let's go there. Oh, actually, we shouldn't do that. That'll burn your house down. But like, right, right? Because you get
Let's
some of
avoid
those
that,
moments too. But yeah, but
it's true too. It's kind of like we talked about in the past, it's the trust factor is huge. But the other side of that coin is we also need to make sure that we're working with the right influencers for those things. And not all influencers are going to do the content that's right for your program. And it's like square peg round hole, right? Like let's find the right influencers that are right for upper funnel, that are right for the use cases. And maybe they're doing the cleaning TikToks. And then the folks that are used to driving folks to commerce, to purchase, right? That doesn't mean that every influencer does that. It almost like that matchmaking process where before it was really around, are they brand fans? Do they resonate with their audience? There's almost one more checkbox there around like, what is the type of creative they make? And does it make sense with where we're slotting them in the funnel? So it's just another thing to think about. But also if you can find the right people, the trust is so much easier because they're like, oh yeah, they know what the heck they're doing. They've done this before. So we know they know how to talk about it. We know their audience is used to it. And then hopefully the magic happens where the action is taken on that because our strategy is so sound, we're able to just go and have this happen.
Yeah, I love that idea of the new checkbox. And I also love that the example you used was Arm & Hammer, right? Because if there is one product people are like, it's going to be very hard to demonstrate, right? In the moment, direct sales, it's probably baking soda is going to be pretty high on the list. Like everyone knows it's in the grocery store and that's where they always go. And am I going to stop and buy that at Amazon right now or, anywhere online? But the idea is that when you are doing these types of activations, you can see the signals even for a CPG product. And frankly, you know it when you see it. The content's so good and so compelling that you can feel it. And which is actually a perfect segue and almost contrast to another thing you said in our warm-up session, which is you said, don't talk to me about engagement rates, which is really interesting because particularly for the CPG guys, early in influencer marketing, that was all they could talk about, right? I mean, again, it's especially when you're just looking at some of the public data on like an Instagram where you can't even necessarily see impressions, right? What have you got to talk about other than engagement rates? So take me through that. Take me through that comment. I personally also have a love-hate relationship with engagement rates. Anybody who's read my blog posts know that I think they've been misused, misinterpreted, and it's actually done real damage to the industry. Not to sound like a lunatic, but I actually believe that. At the same time, I'm coming around to their value a little bit. And it's not engagement rates' fault that people don't know how to do math or talk about them. So, but I want to bring it back to you because now I think I have a partner in crime or a partner in, in this sort of philosophy that it ain't all about engagement rates. Tell me what you meant by the quote or the statement and what do you think and what's the implications?
We need to get you like a t-shirt that says like engagement rate and it's got the circle with the X through it. So you can start busting that out. But no, I agree with you on the engagement rate piece in the fact that it's not the end all be all. I think engagement rates are interesting to understand how someone's audience interacts with them, but it should just be used directionally. It is not the end all be all. And I think as influencer marketers, we lean on that stat mostly because we didn't have the resources, the insight, etc., to understand past that, right? And I think that that's the reason that Tinuiti works with gen.video on a lot of our projects, is because we want to understand what's after the like, the share, the comment. What are we doing next? And that's kind of what we were talking about early on, because yes, engagement rates directionally can tell me, okay, I know micro influencers should have a 3% engagement rate. If it's below that, then maybe they have some bots or followers, sure, whatever. But what I also care about is if I spend $500 on a micro influencer piece of content, but they sell, $1,000 worth of product, then their engagement rate can be 0.0001%. I could care less about that, right? Because my end goal is at that point in time to move product. So I think that from our perspective, we've been kind of handcuffed into using engagement rate as a directional measurement, but we've kind of stopped there. Whereas we can push ourselves now through some of the technology that you guys have, or even like we talked about at the top of this with affiliate, right? Where we know influencers and affiliates are turning into this gray area that cross over to give us more information to understand what we're actually doing. I also think, kind of going back to what we were talking about before with the funnel, KPIs for each of our activations and a measurement framework or a learning agenda set up front will also be very beneficial, right? Because again, if I finish a project and say, we got this, and this engagement rate, the next question is that good? What did that do for my business? How do I compare? Should I invest again? What did my last dollar get me? So if we're able to set up a structure that says, this is our KPIs and it's, X, Y, and Z, whatever they are, depending on what our project is, when we come out of it, we then are able to say in a non-biased way, this was beneficial. If you spend the same amount, our estimate is you'll get this other, output from it. And we're able to back into that depending on what we're trying to do. So I am an engagement rate person directionally, but not necessarily it being the end all be all, because I think that there's smarter ways for us to set ourselves up to understand what success is, to understand what our money has gotten us, and then to take that information and apply it to future projects and say, this wasn't as successful as we wanted. Okay, let's learn from that and go to the next piece, so on and so forth. So I think it's just, for me, there's step one directional, and then there's step two, which is kind of more factual.
Yeah, I like that. And I love that you highlight the fact that every campaign or every activation, whatever phrase we want to use, should have its own customized KPI structure. And there are so many KPIs that are available now. And so to say that any one metric is going to be the definitive one in a campaign, makes no sense, given the level of sophistication that we're at now. And that's the problem is again, when we oversimplify things, we're missing so much of the magic. Another thing I'd say is part of the reason I've been coming around on engagement rates is actually one of the guests on the show, Denise Fatola of Bear, right, talked about how important engagements is to her. And it was interesting because she is a very sophisticated influencer marketing, inside of a brand, leading influencer marketing for that whole organization, at least in North America. And the measurements that she uses and the data she taps into is vast. And so she's very sophisticated, pushes through the funnel, thinks about every metric she can get her hands on, but she still does love engagements. But what I heard her to say, and anybody who hasn't seen that episode should go watch it, it's really the quality of the engagement. She's still not being trapped into, was I above or below benchmark? She's looking at the quality of the engagements, and that I believe in, and that is true. And that's something we've been leaning into as well, because you can glean so many things out of sentiment once you're really, thinking through that. So, all right. So that's great. That is very helpful. I think we're aligned. I think we're aligned on engagements.
We'll get you that shirt after this.
Right? Because it's a conversation that the industry needs to have. And so I want to come back to something we talked about, earlier in the episode, where again, we were talking about how involved and interested so many disciplines have become. Right? There's PR, who's kind of been there from the beginning. There's definitely like the national media side of things, or just media in general. Obviously, you've got the brand managers, you've got influencer specialist platforms, like a
Mhm.
gen.video. Any predictions about where this goes? Like, if everyone's doing influencer, sort of your point, and everyone, even if everyone's like playing nicely in the sandbox, is there literally, do we just literally stop talking about influencer at some point and it's just part of every discipline and every activation? Is this, is the center of gravity going to continue to swing around? What are the dynamics you think are at play here? And if you can, look into your crystal ball, pun intended, and
Love
let
it.
us know where you think this shakes out, and what should we be thinking about as professionals, positioning ourselves personally or even our companies in terms of where we want to be to be at the center of gravity.
Yeah, and I think it's a good question. You and I have been in this space for a long time, and I know that every couple of years I hear from people, is this influencer bubble going to burst? Like, can it sustain? Will it continue happening? And I think that there's a couple things that I always go back to, which is like the root of influencer marketing is built on word of mouth marketing. People are always going to have recommendations. They're going to talk about what they like, what they don't like. All that social media has done is given folks a platform and enabled them to be able to say that at scale versus me just calling on the phone and saying, oh my God, try this great new restaurant, you have to go try it, right? Like, so the basis of what it is will not change. That will continue. I think the medium in which it will come to us could change, right? Because even if you think about the evolution of the last 10 or 15 years, it went from blogs to more like video content, to now we're short form video content. We dabbled in Clubhouse and short form audio. Obviously you and I are talking a podcast now, which is something. So I think the medium could change. I think that we as influencer marketers need to be smart and watch the landscape. I know that, I'm sure you guys did this on your side too, but even with everything going on with TikTok and Congress, we on our side said, let's play devil's advocate. Worst case scenario, what are our backup plans if this were to change tomorrow, and how does that impact our clients? That doesn't mean we have to call clients and be like, oh my God, this could be terrible. No, like, but what is our backup plan if something were to happen, and how are we going to evolve, and how does that change whatever the strategy is that we set up? We even did that internally, and there are folks that said like, TikTok's too big to fail, no way, it's going to be fine. Who knows, right? We have no idea. I think like the last 4 years have showed us anything. Like, we've lived through how many unprecedented times. Like, there's no such thing as something that's not going to happen, right? So I think that the smart thing for us to do is to watch and say, what's next? What's changing? Is the big behemoth that is Meta, is it going to stay as what it is, or are we going to continue growing on TikTok? Is there going to be a new challenger that comes up? I mean, we've obviously in the last year seen everything that happened on the Twitter side of the world. So I think that the nuts and bolts, the foundation will stay the same, but the application could be different. And we just need to stay on top of that and what that looks like. And again, ultimately figure out what is right for our brands too, right? Because, you were talking before about like your last guest with Bayer, like that's going to be different than maybe a CPG brand, that's different than a fashion brand, that's different than a makeup brand, right? Like every brand's got different goals, needs, audiences, places that they will want their content out and on, and different ways of looking at success. So I think that ultimately figuring out what that is and where your niche is, where the white space is important. And it's not copy and paste. It's different depending on the brand and different depending on what we're trying to do. So I think ultimately we're on a path that we will continue. I just think, as we always have in this industry, we have to move fast, be agile, and be able to adapt, because it will continue to change. And the only constant in the world is change, right? So I think we're used to that at this point.
Yeah, it's funny. I really like that answer, because we've had a hard time getting excited about any systemic risk that TikTok is going to be banned. And I think, we've same thing. We've talked, internally about like, is it too big or too successful to fail? Like, again, somebody would presumably step up and say, well, we're not going to let billions of dollars of value be destroyed. We'll sell it. We'll do whatever Congress needs to let it go. And, and the hue and cry that would occur from a huge section of America if, there really was an attempt to, to have some sort of a blanket ban. But the funny thing is, I think you're much more right that actually I'm going to call it the passivity is we're just so used to change that it's like, yes, you know what I can tell you for sure is going to happen. Something's going to be super different 2 or 3
Yep.
months from now, right?
Yep.
And so the pace of change is one you just have to be comfortable with. You're going to exhaust yourself otherwise. And what probably, I mean, hopefully what the answer is we're doing some of it subconsciously is always thinking about, how to stay flexible and how to stay nimble. But I love the fact that it sounds like you guys almost war game this, like to think through, like, what are we going to do? What would we do? What would be our reactions? Because what is it? Failing to plan is a plan for failure or
Right.
something
There
like
you
that.
go.
So you've got a plan, and and that's still going to be, no matter how good our instincts are, having a plan is going to be better than because something is going to change. That is for
Always.
sure what's happening in this
Always.
space. I want to come back a little bit more to measurement because, again, I think your insights here are so very interesting. When we think about, like the baking soda, and again, we've talked about engagement rates, right? So we're looking for these buying signals. We're looking for these, opportunity to see attribution of revenue, which, by the way, the great news too is that gets easier the bigger these campaigns are, because we can literally even start to look in, whatever you want to call it, like IRI type data, and like see,
Yep.
are we moving the needle literally at brick and mortar grocery? Like things like that start to become possible as these budgets get bigger. But when you see a campaign coming your way that you're like, this is going to be more awareness, this is going to be more upper funnel, or again, the dream metric that we might have around some attribution, sales attribution is going to be tough, along with engagement rates. What else might you be looking at to define success?
Yep. And again, I think that aligns back to, so to take a step back, whenever we do any project with our clients, we don't jump into, here's the influencers, here's the platform, here's those things. We always start with, what is our strategic purpose and why are we doing this?
Yep.
And I'm sure you've had those conversations with clients before too, Bill, but like I've had conversations with clients where I'm like, give me more, like, why do you want to use influencers? Like, what are you trying to get out of this? And sometimes they're very articulate, and sometimes they're just like, because I think we're supposed to be there. And while I do agree, I think that there's just like a reason for you to be there. That's not what we can use to measure. That's not what we can go out with, because we're not actually setting ourselves up to say that this was successful or not. So what we always try and do with every project is actually start at the end, at the beginning, and say, what are we trying to get out of this? What is the goals of this project? Are we, again, like you said, are we moving product? Are we trying to showcase usage of that product, get people a little bit more, excited about it, interested in it, whatever, right? Figuring out what that is. And then those KPIs kind of generally tie back to that pretty easily, right? It's not like us going out and saying, these are the KPIs, but we're able to say, is it, like you mentioned before, is it sentiment? Do people now, like the product because they've seen influencers show them the right way to use it? I worked on a beauty care product once many moons ago where they had terrible customer reviews. They had terrible sentiment about the brand because people were using the hair care product wrong. They just didn't know. So we did a YouTube campaign showing people the right way to use the hair care product. And here's the way it should be done. And this is how long you leave it in. And this is the way you get it out, and all the things to do. The sentiment changed from the beginning of that project to the end so dramatically because YouTubers were showing them the right way to use it. They saw a sales lift from that project. They saw the reviews go back to more positive, all because of an educational process. So again, we weren't directly attributing our sales to that, right? We were looking at it holistically, but the other two signals there of sentiment as well as reviews also told that story too. So I think it really depends on what you're trying to do at what phase of the customer journey. And then your KPIs kind of bolt to that pretty easily. But if you don't have that defined up front, or you're trying to do everything, like I've had a lot of clients that say, well, of course we want sales. And I'm like, but this is a brand new product on the market. And I'm like, we can put it out there to people, but if they don't know about it, they don't know why they need to use it, they don't know what the benefit is to them, you can't just always go into the lower funnel or growth side of things. You still do need some of that education, some of that upper funnel. So again, I think if you're trying to do, you need to define what you're trying to do. You can't do everything. And then ultimately have your plan. And those KPIs really will just kind of work themselves out because of what you're trying to do.
I am way too arrogant to have ever said to a client, why do you want to use influencers? I think I say, well, obviously you want to work with influencers. I guess I got to remember that, because that's actually a really good tool to even strip that away and again start with the end. I hope I do some of that, but I I definitely have a lesson to learn in there to say, like, no, why influencers? What is that about? Tell me more. Tell me more about that. That's definitely never come out of my mouth. So good. Last but certainly not least, any other wicked awesome? See, I'm from Boston now, so everything's wicked. Wicked's a good thing. Examples you want to share where it all kind of came together, and what was that magic in the campaign?
It's funny. I think that there's tons of different stories that we could talk about. I think we've talked about a couple of brand examples even in this call, but my favorite is integrated marketing programs. Like, again, I think that if it's great. Yes, give me all the money, work with all the influencers, your talent. Like, that's really cool, flashy, fun stuff to talk about. But I actually like stuff that's not as flashy, but much more mechanical, that actually helps a brand move forward. So I love to see influencers tie in with commerce, tie in with paid media, really driving to that holistic customer experience and being able to say, like, oh, as then consumer, I saw so and so drinking this new beverage, and then I went to Amazon to purchase and I saw an ad for it, and then like all of these things that tie together, in my opinion, are what ultimately move the needle. And I think that that's where, when you are a consumer and it all makes sense, you're like, oh yeah, I got hit by this and that and the other thing. Okay, now is my time to buy. And whether that's, nonlinear, like we talked about before, and it's confusing and it's messy, it's still hitting them at every touch point where there could be consideration. The attribution of it, where it actually happens, that's neither here nor there. But I love the fact that you can find people in all of these places and get them to your end goal, because I think that that's where it is successful, versus us working in different silos and OTT doing something different than out of home, doing something different than digital. And I think that that's, in my opinion, harder to get what you want out of it. So I love integrated projects. I love it where we can take influencer content and put it in all sorts of different places and have people say, like, oh, I saw that there, I saw that there. So I think that that's, to me, success. And I know obviously that's a lot of what you guys do on your side as well, is try and connect those dots, especially in a commerce perspective.
Yeah, I love it. It felt like a very OG kind of comment, because when we were both starting in this industry, it was virtually impossible to do that. And it wasn't even just that, oh, we're not going to use influencer in that way. It was like, I remember comments from brand managers, some of whom I'm still working with, who'd be like, we have never been able to repurpose a single piece of content across, any two platforms in any sort of, or disciplines in any way that was ever deliberate or intelligent. It's just too hard in silos. But between the rise of, digital and walls kind of coming down, internally, even at these big enterprises, you're seeing it more. And it's so powerful because, again, not only are you being incredibly efficient with your production dollars and, and incredibly strategic in a sense, but you're getting that consistent editorial voice, which is just enormous. I mean, there is no better way to confuse a consumer than to be coming at them with 8 different messages, depending on, which platform they're in or what experience they're kind of having. I mean, again, the shopper journey is no longer linear. So, this idea that you're going to, well, here's my upper funnel message, here's my lower funnel message. I mean, sure, we could talk a bit more about like key selling attributes if we're on a product page, but the holistic message is still got to be resonating and consistent with whatever we said, wherever we think we're capturing them in the upper funnel environment. And so that consistency of voice, I think, is one of the most underappreciated dynamics. And what a great place to end the conversation. So Crystal, thank you so much. This was amazing. I knew I would learn a lot, and I did, as always. And so I know that the audience did. Any last words you've got for our audience?
No, I just want to say thank you, Bill, for having me on. You know that you and I can sit and talk influencer for hours and have before. So appreciate you having me on. This was really, really fun. And hopefully we can do it again someday.
Absolutely. Yeah, this was amazing. Well, everyone, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next week on Generation Influence. Hey, thanks for tuning in. New episodes of Generation Influence drop every Wednesday, so be sure to check us out and subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts. You can find information on next week's guest in the description below. Hope to see you then and there.